you can kind of get used to anything, some pretty horrible situations. And after a while, they become normal. But in the course of horror becoming normal, you just lose pieces of yourself.
Just 30 minutes ago, I found this huge insect in my room, so that I was preparing for the podcast, and that's one thing specifically threw me off. So I was just trying to get it together.
Although I'll take slow software over giant insects any day.
First question, what made you say yes?
Well, I've actually been trying to become a guest on podcasts, on more podcasts. And you just had such a great vibe of it's about people and it's about connection. And it just seemed like such an open and interesting podcast that I definitely wanted to be part of it.
Thank you so much for saying that. That means a lot. And I hope you have a great time today. I was actually researching on your LinkedIn to explore more of what we could speak about. And I stumbled upon Hemisphere Studios. And I even read Dear Husband, which I have so many questions about. But first I wanted to ask you, how did you get into self-publishing and how did you fall in love with writing, comics and short stories and novels?
Well, I've always been a storyteller ever since I was a kid. I started out doing a lot. I was always making up stories. I was that kid that would make up stories and make my friends act them out with me. I also was really into drawing. I actually, if you look far enough down my LinkedIn profile, you'll see I went to art school.
Yes.
I dropped out of art school in the early 90s, and of course now I'm in tech. I went to school to learn how to draw comics because I'm also a big reader, and I've always been a big fan of sci-fi and fantasy and superheroes, so I thought I love reading comics, I love drawing, I bet drawing comics would be a great career for me. And about halfway through art school, which I'd gone to specifically to learn how to draw comics, I realized I did not enjoy drawing comics at all. And it occurred to me, it's really difficult. It's incredibly grueling. And I didn't have the discipline or the interest in sitting down and drawing the same motorcycle, exactly the same, from multiple angles at different perspectives, panel after panel, page after page. And I realized that's the kind of stuff that really gets you consistent work in comics. Big splashy pinup stuff is nice, but it's the narrative skills and backgrounds and all the stuff that nobody really wants to do. And I thought, you really have to love this to make a living at it. I did love it. But I did discover how much I loved actually writing stories. I worked on some projects with friends at school, and when it was time to divvy up the jobs, I always wanted writer. I never wanted to be a penciler or an inker or anything like that. And after that, I wrote my first comic in the mid 90s. I worked on it with a friend of mine, and that was my first real published anything, and we self-published it. And after that, it was just pitching to different companies, which led to me writing short stories, and web comics were really becoming a thing, so I decided to do it as a web comic. That's how Hemisphere Studios started. This rambling diatribe is going somewhere.
No. It makes sense. Yes.
The process of querying agents, and then hopefully you get an agent, and then that agent tries to sell your book to a publisher, and hopefully they find a publisher, and then going through the whole process of editing the book again. You've got to write it, and then probably write it one or two more times, and then you've got to edit it and get it to a polished place where you can show it to an agent, and then they'll make you edit it again to show it to a publisher, and then the publisher will make you edit it again. And at that point, this is going to sound weird, but doing that much work on one book would have made me hate the book by that point. I didn't have the patience or the grit, or just constantly querying agents and publishers. I couldn't do it. So I just thought self-publish. And that's really what I like about it, the speed of turnaround, which isn't to say that you shouldn't edit and draft and have a really nice, you still need all that stuff. It's just, it's more on my own terms, which is what I like about it.
Amazing. And I have questions about, Dear Husband, which, I read the description and it said that it is a letter. It's a soldier's last letter. And I felt very ashamed of myself, where I immediately thought that the soldier would be a man. But when I read the letter, it was actually addressed to a man and it was by a woman soldier. That was a big plot twist. I feel like a lot of people, when they think of soldiers, maybe it's just like me, I'm sorry to say that, would think of a guy.
Historically, we're trained to see soldiers as men.
Was that intentional on your part to completely throw off the reader on, what they discover?
I mean, yeah, definitely. I'm always interested in doing that. But I also have a tendency to lean more towards women characters in my books and comics.
Yeah.
I have a trilogy of fantasy novels where there are almost no men in the books at all. And at first I wasn't doing it on purpose. And then once I realized it was happening, I started doing it on purpose. Yeah. I've said to multiple people that particular trilogy fails the reverse Bechdel test. I think I only have 4 total named male characters. And I think only 2 of them actually have a conversation with one another, and that's because they're married. But I think even most of their conversations are about the female hero. So
we totally stand for that. That's amazing. I wanted to know what inspired you to write a story about, war, robots, and losing yourself as a person. That is what I believe the theme of Dear Husband was.
It was right after the whole Afghanistan and Iraq war started, and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about just the sheer overconfidence of the American government, the American military, the American people of yeah, it's just going to be a walk. We're going to go in there and it's, in a couple of weeks we'll be running the place. And clearly 20 years later that did not happen. And that was a big part of what was on my mind. And I was just, thinking about my dad is a veteran and he's told me lots of stories about war and the army. And so I was thinking about now this new generation of soldiers are going to be going through all the stuff that we've just spent, at that point, 3 decades unpacking all the damage that war really does to soldiers. And now here we are, we're going to send a whole new generation of young people off to suffer that same thing. And so that was also driving it. And then the idea that these robots were initially built to fight wars for us. And then once they killed all our enemies, they turned around and went after us was really long walk for the short drink of water of an analogy to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and how they started out as Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan fighting for American interests. And then obviously, we disappointed them and betrayed them and didn't give them all the things we said we were going to give them after they fought the Soviets, and so they turned on us. And I just thought of that too, of you get this great idea of I'm going to get these people, or I'm going to build this machine to go and do all the stuff I don't really want to do, and then how it blows up in your face. And so that was also part of it.
Amazing. I was just casually reading it because I thought it'll give me more of an insight to, who you are and to carry on a conversation, but it just gave me such chills, It used such vivid examples. I was wondering, how did you put yourself in the character's shoes like that? It was as if you were almost there to experience those moments. I mean, I was just taken aback.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, honestly, I've never served in the military. I've never fought in a war. I do not have common corresponding experiences to any of that. So I was going off of a lot of stories that my dad would tell me and stories I heard from other people. And it's just that idea of you can kind of get used to anything. So you can get used to some pretty horrible situations, and after a while they become normal. But in the course of horror becoming normal, you just lose pieces of yourself. The more normal that horror becomes, the more used to it you get, the more of yourself gets stripped away in the process, because you have to lose those parts of yourself in order for the horror to be normal. And so I have a vividly overactive imagination. So once I started on that path, it was just me. I sometimes get to a point in a story where I'm just like, what's an even more horrible thing I can do to this poor person I created? And that's really like, how dark can it go? And like the conceit of the letter was that whole, like, it starts off and she's in one place and it ends and she's in a much darker, more horrible place. And so I was also coming at it from each time she checks in, it's just worse and worse, until finally at the end, she's like, by the time you get this, I'll be dead. And you don't have much longer. Like, so that's, it starts out, hey, this is all going pretty well, I'll probably be home soon, to, I'm already dead and you'll be dead soon. So they had to get
It was crazy, I was just like, I got scared. I was like, shit, I was not ready for this, It was so great. I was so impressed. And I mean, it was just crazy. So thank you so much for writing that. I'm so impressed by when I just see like such talent, and I felt like I got to experience it. So I'm super grateful. But I want to ask you, the last illustration, what was that about? Did the husband ever receive the letters? Because in the last illustration, it kind of showed that there was this, the bad guy, was holding up a letter and the woman was crying. So did he receive those letters?
Actually, that's the husband and their two kids.
The guy was kind of laughing. He had like an evil face. Am I mistaken?
No, I think that was unintentional. That was actually the husband reading the letter. So if you see there's a girl in the background who's got a gun, that's one of this woman's daughters. So she's now also the next generation picking up the gun to fight in this war. Yeah. So, but that's actually really interesting. You're the first person to interpret that last page that way. So that's a really interesting take on it.
I was just scared. I was like, this would be the worst if he never received all these letters and he never got to know the whole story. I was like, shit, what do I do?
It's that dark a place. I pulled back from that, and at least the husband gets to read his wife's final work.
Okay, perfect. Well, that makes me kind of happy. And writing and stuff, is that like I'm sure it's a creative outlet for you when you went through personal experiences, whether it was pain, whether it was joy. Did you try to ever create a character around that to kind of express those emotions?
I definitely explore those like feelings and emotions and struggles that I have through my writing, but that's never the intent. It's more, once I'm in the story writing it, that's when I'll start to pull things out of my own life and my own experiences and give them to the characters. Or often it's a sci-fi version of my own struggles.
Did you ever get emotional while writing this letter?
That's I usually have something of an emotional disconnect from the story while I'm writing it, but every once in a while I'll write something that's very emotionally powerful, and I'll feel it. Like I'll get choked up and like a little teary. That definitely happened with this one. It doesn't always happen, but it was hard to be emotionally distant from this one. And what's actually interesting about this comic is that it wasn't designed as a comic. The letter was actually a short story that I had written, and then the artist Ozzy Rodriguez, he and I had worked before on one of the other webcomics is by him as well. And one day we were talking, he said, oh, hey, I hope you don't mind, but I thought that Dear Husband story was really cool. So I just did a comic of it. And like he did the comic, and then he printed up these little mini comics of them. And I was just like, oh my God. No, I don't mind. You can feel free to do that whenever you want. So that comic just kind of happened. Like I had written the short story, and then my friend and frequent collaborator just went ahead and drew it of his own volition. So that was really cool. So it's interesting that you picked that one.
it was super insane. Like, I mean, I felt like it was such a pleasure reading it, and how it was in like such a, like it was a tour letter format. I was just really invested in it. It was crazy.
Blown away by the art when he showed it to me. I was just like, wow, this elevates the story so much.
Yeah.
And if you want a palate cleanser, check out The Twilight of Magic, which is the other story he did. It's much shorter and it ends on a joke.
Okay.
So you want to pick me up after the emotional toll of your husband. Twilight of Magic is a good one.
Okay, I can't wait to check it out. And the impression I had of you was a director of engineering at GMG, and then suddenly I discovered that you were an incredible writer, and I was just so fascinated with how does that dynamic work, how are you, both require incredible strenuous efforts, but how are you in tech and in the creative aspect? Like, how did you land up here?
I ask myself that question a lot. I just recently turned 50, so I'm at that age where I'm doing a lot of looking back, and one of the questions I've been asking myself a lot is, how did I get here? How did this happen? Because none of it was planned, I'll say that. I mean, a lot of it comes down to, I'm very big on keeping things separate and having boundaries around the things that I do, boundaries around work, boundaries around hobbies, and so that there's always enough time for the people in my life, there's always enough time for work, there's enough time for my hobbies, and enough time for me.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's hugely important. It's very easy as a creative person and in tech or really any job at this point to get completely overwhelmed by it. But I've always felt like you need to have those boundaries set up and lines of demarcation. Otherwise, something is going to just completely overwhelm you. I've never believed in giving all of myself to one thing, which may be why I'm still doing 5 different things. Maybe if I had given all of myself to one thing, I'd be somewhere else in that career. But I also I get bored easily.
Yeah.
So I need lots of context switching in my life to keep myself engaged. I'm sure if I had been born later, I probably would have been diagnosed with ADD as a kid, because I definitely had trouble focusing and staying on task and had a very wandering mind. Yeah, so it's keeping those boundaries. And my career in tech has been such that it's kind of taught me to do that, because there were a few companies early on where I really did give all of myself and sacrificed other parts of my life. And then, at some point, I mean, it was, it's the tech industry, and, I started during the .com boom. So I've been through the various boom and bust cycles in the tech industry. And so once you go through a couple of layoffs where it doesn't matter how hard you worked, it doesn't matter how good of an employee you were or how dedicated you were, you just lost your job. And once that happened a couple of times, I realized, okay, earn your pay, obviously, do your work, do your best, earn your pay, but at the same time, keep a little bit for yourself and for other people and for other parts of your life, because through all of the layoffs and job changes that I've gone through over the course of my career, my family's always been there, writing's always been there, friends have always, so stay focused on the stuff that stays with you no matter what.
Thanks for sharing that. That was really eye-opening. But you say you went to school for art. So how did you land up in tech?
I can tell this story because have actually told the top executives at Gallery Media Group this story, so it won't come back to bite me. I pretty much lied my way into my first tech job. I had done, I went to art school, and then I worked a lot of warehouse jobs. I was a massage therapist for a while. I did office work, and then it was early 1999. I needed a job. I was looking in the paper, so that should tell you how long ago it was. I saw an ad for a web designer, which is what we were called back then. And I thought, I have no idea what that is, but sure, I could figure out how to do it. So I applied for the job. And it was back then in the late 90s when all of a sudden everybody had a website and everybody needed a website. And back then your website wasn't doing much. It was basically text and images, but every company had to have a website. So a lot of audiovisual companies that up till that point had been doing a lot of commercials and print advertising, started offering websites. But the people who ran those companies didn't know any more about building websites than I did at the time. So it was easy to kind of go. And also, I had a friend who did web design, and I used one of his websites as my sample site. And I learned just enough from him, enough jargon, so that if I was asked questions about it, I could answer them. So at the time, I was in my late 20s. I had really long hair, like down to here. And I like dressed kind of like dangly earrings, and I wore like a turtleneck and a sport jacket and jeans and cowboy boots. Like I was all over the place in this interview. And I did that thing that people with really long hair do where you just tie the top of it back.
I see.
Like I did that. Like I did so many things you absolutely should not do for a job interview.
Yeah.
And so sitting there, I'm talking to the one guy who's interviewing me. He doesn't really know much more about it than I do. So I feel like I'm kind of snowing him at this point. And that's when the owner of the company walks in and he looks at me and he goes, "Just taking one look at you. I know I want you to work here." He said, "When can you start?" And I said, "Day after tomorrow," because I needed that next day to learn what design was. So, over 20 years later, it's my career and I'm director of engineering.
That's insane.
But it was a thing of like, you fake it till you make it. I taught myself on the job, and that's kind of how my career has been. A new technology comes out, the company wants to use it, I'll learn how to do it. So that's how I got into tech.
Oh my God, thank you for sharing that story. I could have never imagined it was something so wild. Insane. I mean, would you say you did not really know what you were getting into, and now how tech has been such a huge career of yours? Do you actually enjoy doing it? Are you happy you made the right choice?
Yes, it drives you crazy. There are parts of the job that can get monotonous, and it can drive you crazy. And I will say the constant learning and development of a tech skill set is one of the things that I've always liked about it, because I get bored easily, so there's always something new to learn. But now that I'm getting older, like keeping up with that is becoming a little more difficult, which is why I started transitioning into management. Like I had always said, I don't want to be a manager. I don't want to be somebody's boss, but then at some point I realized, well, I don't want to always be the guy coding all the time. Like I feel like I'm reaching an age where I should be mentoring the people coding, and if you're 50 years old and you're a coder, you better be one of the best coders out there, because there's someone half your age who will work twice as hard. At some point you can. But I've also discovered that I really enjoy that. I enjoy leadership. I enjoy mentoring. I enjoy managing. I mean, I'm lucky. The team that I manage is really easy to manage. Like they're all amazing developers. They're all amazing people. So I've absolutely been spoiled with my first team. That's for sure.
Well, I'm so happy for you, and thank you so much for sharing that story. That was incredible. I actually want to ask you, how has your experience been on that note, working at GMG?
It's been fantastic. I've been at this for over 20 years, but I have to say, and I'm not just saying this because they might watch this podcast and I'm still currently working there, it is one of my favorite, if not my absolute favorite job that I've had in my entire career. It's a really great place to work. The ethos they have is work hard and be nice to people. And it's absolutely lived at the company. I've had the best relationships with coworkers, with managers, getting to be a manager for the first time, and just all the way up to our CEO, Ryan Harwood. Yeah. Everybody it just lives that ethos. And I came along just after we were acquired by Vayner. So I don't really know too much of the pre-Vayner GMG experience, when actually just pure wow.
Yeah.
Because GMG came post-acquisition. But working for Vayner has been fantastic. I haven't had too much interaction with Gary at all. I've been in a couple of meetings and never as a major participant, but his energy is definitely infectious. You can see it throughout the whole company.
That's amazing. GMG is actually, one of my dream companies to work at. And I actually got even selected in the first round at VaynerMedia, but I could not make it through. They were looking for a creator, and I'm not really an editor. So I learned that, because of the pandemic, a lot of companies have started hiring remotely. And I'm a big Gary disciple, and he said, start networking, people are the biggest ROI. And that's how I started the podcast, and just networking my way in, to the company, learning what is it that I can develop, or how do I fill the gaps where I can make me and the dream come closer. And I know I love that about GMG is how they stay so true to the culture of people first. And even with employees, everyone's just been genuinely happy. People have been confident in their work, and that is something that's very rare to find now, in the social media world where everything is so fast paced. People really want to stay, they feel grounded. So that's awesome to hear, and I'm super happy for you being there. I know you'll be happy in that company environment, so that's super cool.
Yeah, I know I'm not sure what other departments are doing or looking for, or in terms of hiring or anything like that, but there is a whole podcast department at GMG. So I would be happy to let you know if there's anything going there.
Please do, that would be a dream. Anyway, on that later, but I wanted to ask you, what's your story as a person, from when you were born to Brett to today?
Oh, wow. It is a long and not always interesting story.
I doubt it.
I was born in 1971, born and raised in New Jersey. Do not hold that against me. I have this weird George Bailey relationship with New Jersey. I've been trying to get out for over 20 years, and I just can't seem to. My wife and I are planning to move down south, and I'm like, yeah, something's gonna happen, and I'm gonna be stuck in New Jersey. So I've informed my wife and my kids, if I die in New Jersey, you have to bury me outside of New Jersey. So yeah, I grew up in the 70s. Nobody really paid attention to anything I was doing for probably the first 10 to 12 years of my life, which was great. I could just leave the house at the beginning of the day and no one would see me till dinner time. And yeah, like I said, I was always a creative kid. I was always a storyteller. I always kind of had trouble with things like math and science and, all the stuff you would expect from someone who works in tech. Those were always the areas where I really struggled. I was always the one staring out the window daydreaming in math class. And then, fairly basic middle class suburban upbringing. Went to high school in the 80s, which was an interesting decade to be a teenager. I always felt like I would have been a better 90s teenager than an 80s teenager. Felt like that. The 90s was when I started seeing things in music and film and TV and books and stuff that I'd been waiting for my whole life. This. Okay, I'm not the only person who thinks this way. I'm not the only person with these ideas. They exist outside of me. And that the 90s was really the first time in my life when I started to see that, which I guess that coincides with my 20s, which is when you start to notice stuff like that. Yeah, I have a son and a stepdaughter who, as it turns out, were born within a couple of months of each other. So that's been interesting. They both turned 21 this year.
Wow.
So through all of this, through the tech career and the self-publishing, I've also been raising kids and having a family. That's definitely had its own challenges too.
I'm sure.
I think about this career is I was never trying to make it a career. I was always just trying to keep a roof over everyone's head and food on the table. And then one day I looked around and I was like, oh, I've been doing this for 20 years. How did that happen?
That's crazy. Thanks for sharing that. I want to ask you, was there any life-defining moment in your life that has really shaped who you are as a person today?
That's actually a really good question. I don't think there was ever one big defining moment, one thing that happened where I can look at it and say, I was one person before that happened, and then now I'm someone completely different because of it. It's more, for me, it's the accumulation of smaller events throughout my life that just slowly shaped me into the person I am.
I see. That definitely makes a lot of sense. Would you say that there's this question that we ask everyone on the podcast is, are you happy?
That's a really good question. And the question I've been asking myself, given the time of my life that I'm at and everything that's going on. And I would say, on balance, yes. Obviously, no one's happy 100% of the time. But even times when I'm not happy, I'm at least content. And I know how fortunate I am in this day and age, the world being the way it is, to be content and happy most of the time with my life. I'm very fortunate and privileged in that way. So, and I acknowledge that and recognize it.
What would you say is something that you can be very definitive about, that this contributes to my happiness, whether it's writing or spending time with family or career stuff?
I think for me, it's that sort of haven home, like not necessarily a routine or any particular thing that I do. You know, it's being with my family. It's having that space to create, that space to relax. And that really is what contributes to my happiness and contentment. Like, I don't need a routine necessarily, but having the space to create a routine is where a lot of my happiness comes from. And from my family and from my relationships. My wife and kids contribute a great deal to my happiness. I don't think I'd be one of those people who's really happy completely on my own. I definitely need people around me to be happy. But so home and family, I guess.
Thanks for sharing that. And what would you say is your dream, end goal, or your ambition?
I know I'm saying that a lot, but they're all really good questions.
Thank you.
I mean, that's actually changed a lot over the course of my life. At this point, I don't know that I'm ever going to reach a point where I'm retired, where I just don't work anymore, largely because I don't think I'll ever have the money to do that. But what I would love is to always be able to support my family and the people who rely on me. But to do so in a way that also allows me to be the person that I am, to live the life that I want, to always be creating. I would love to, at some point, be telling stories for a living, to be living off of the stories that I've already written. I mean, that's the dream. You create a thing once and then live off it for the rest of your life. So like continuing to support my family in a creative and fulfilling way. But that also, because something else I'm noticing as I get older, like as I get older, there are just certain things I'm not going to be able to do anymore, or I won't be able to maintain a level of intensity or productivity or whatever you want to call it. So something that allows for that as I get older, for certain things to diminish as other things become more prominent. That's the end goal.
Amazing. And I know, GMG is a big company and it has so many even creative sides. Do they know that you are such an incredible writer? Have you ever offered to do a collaboration?
Yes. So, I mean, they know all about my writing and all that. There's not, because the thing about my writing too is I've learned that I can't write nonfiction. I cannot write articles to save my life. That is a completely different writer skill set that I don't have. I'm much more of a fiction writer. So there's not a big space for that. I actually did pitch a podcast to the podcast team that was a fiction podcast, and they really liked it. It was very, they said it was very inventive and creative, but it wouldn't have fit with their audience. And it's funny, even though it's a podcast and it would have essentially been an audio drama, more money would have had to go into it than goes into an interview podcast. So I have put the feelers out of, hey, maybe we can do something, but my creativity and GMG's audience don't always meet up.
I can understand. Their target audience is pretty young and very culture oriented, versus yours is very classic and someone who really deeply appreciates writing, someone who's ready to invest their time into read something. There's this, I feel a little more social media centric, short attention spans. Everyone wants everything super quickly and consume it and stuff like that. So maybe that could be the contradiction.
Yeah. And so I'm always open to any creative endeavor. So we'll see.
Yes,
never say never.
Absolutely. I feel it's a company that is expanding, and how they were earlier just into the Pure Wow thing, which was only simply women centric thing, and now they've evolved into a different demographic. I'm sure they will evolve into a different demographic, and you should be the leader at thought there, and be hey, and I'm ready with the content.
That would be great. I'm anticipating another brand to come soon, because we launched 137 in 3 years at this point, almost. Wow. So yeah, I feel we're due for another brand, and maybe it'll be a little more in that space. entertainment and fiction and things like that.
I do have a very good and strong feeling about it because I know it's such a huge company and how they appreciate and they know what to do with talent. And you're just pure talent, So you guys just need to match your vision. And
just kind of going along with what you were saying in that they do know what to do with talent and they're very skilled. Like GMG is skilled with that, Vayner is skilled with that. So I also kind of have this attitude of like, they know what my talents are. If there's some place where they'd be useful, I'll know because they will not hesitate to tap that vein of talent. So that's also something I kind of keep in mind. Like they know what I'm all about. And if there's a use for me creatively somewhere, I'll know. Someone will tell me.
I could not find you on Instagram. Do you have an Instagram page?
No, actually, I don't have any social media. It was the end of last summer and I had Twitter. I was really active on Twitter. I had Facebook mostly so people from high school knew where to find me. Had an Instagram that I was also very active in. There was a Facebook page for Hemisphere Studios. There was an Instagram for Hemisphere Studios.
Yes.
But at some point, it was towards the end of last summer, I just couldn't handle it anymore. Like
Why?
Any of it. I just didn't want social media in my life anymore at all. I just could not deal with it. And so I just shut it all down. And so, yeah, it's been almost a year and I really don't regret it. I started up another Hemisphere Studios Instagram just to kind of have it there. And Ozzy and I have been kicking an idea around for a comic that would actually publish on Instagram. So I figured when we started that, there should at least be something to link up my side of things. So, but other than that, I'm not on Instagram. Like I created that, dropped a bunch of images in it and then walked away.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm not on social media at all anymore.
I see. I'm happy for you. I know everyone needs to make their own decisions, but if anytime you do ever give it a thought, I would encourage you, because listening to your dream and seeing how talented you are, the biggest way to match up that talent and turn it into monetize that talent is in today's world, to leverage social media, start making content, start sharing your stuff, you start making your own videos, and once you start getting traction, it would be attractive for companies also to view you as a brand.
That was a concern when I left, was that I had spent a few years building up that social media presence like you're talking about, and leaving social media, I would just be dropping all that. And if I ever came back, I'd have to basically start from scratch.
But it's never too late.
I never say never, but I think I'll stay off it for just a little longer. Because I also been seeing a lot from that too, like the promotional and marketing aspects of social media. And I've also come to the realization that I am terrible at marketing and promoting myself, like so bad. I've made the joke that I could not sell water in the desert.
Stop.
Like that's how bad of a salesperson I am. And so I've always had that struggle too. And so that was something else I was looking at when I left, where I kind of looked at it from this perspective of, okay, the main reason why I got into all of this in the first place was as an avenue to promote my work. And that really wasn't happening. Like I wasn't achieving that. And I've taken courses and I've talked to people and I know all the stuff you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I just can't do it. So I knew that a lot of it was also me kind of doing it wrong or not doing enough of something. But it's one of the, do you have a thing in your life where it's a thing that a lot of people are good at and you're supposed to be good at it and you're just not, no matter how hard you try, no matter what you do, you just can't be good at this thing? Social media is that. And marketing and promotion in general is that for me.
I understand that, your talent, you're not supposed to be good at it, what you're supposed to be good at, you're brilliant at it. I would say recognizing that as challenging, you would be too perfect if you knew everything, so you're superhuman like all of us suck at some things, all of us are great at some things, I'd say just a suggestion, maybe you could hire a young writer, an intern or something like that who would love to and who would die to work for you, because you're so I'm sure you have so much wisdom and knowledge to share with him. And kids know social media, it's our second nature. And you could just hire them hey bro, this is my content and I want you to, start creating graphics out of it or videos out of it. Or, just you could screen record your own self and give context behind why you wrote something and stuff like that. And that would be a little bit of an effort to find the right person. But I know that there's so many young kids who would love to work with a writer, and they have this asset with them, and how both of you could leverage from each other, you know. You don't even have to pay them. Instead, you could teach them, you know, a couple of things about writing or self-publishing and things like that. You could trade value, you know.
Be fantastic. I would absolutely love that. Because I've also said, like, if I could just find someone to do this
Yes.
for me, that would be fantastic. Because also, like, when I'd reach out to people, it would be, well, okay, this is how you do it yourself. And I'm like, well, yeah, no, I know that stuff I'm supposed to do, but I'm not good at it. I need someone else to do it for me. So, I mean, that sort of relationship would also be fantastic. But it's been very difficult, and this may be more information than you necessarily want, but like, it's always been a thing for me. Like, I've never had that sense of myself of like, oh, people want to listen to what I have to say. Oh, like, this young person is going to benefit from my wisdom or whatever. Like that's always been something that I struggled to really believe that, you know, that there would be that value of like, well, yeah, I'm not going to give you any money, but, you know, I'll share my experience and wisdom. And like, I feel like somebody would be like, what do I want that for? So, you know, that's just a little...
I completely understand that. And you know what? You'd be surprised. It was something that I struggled with too, you know, like putting myself out there. When I was starting the podcast, I was like, who cares about what I have to say, you know? Like, no one really cares, you know? Everyone has their own life. But I realized that you would be surprised what the difference between 99% of the people is and the 1% of the people is, you know. People will not believe in you, you know, initially. But, you know, when you make it, everyone will be like, you know, like, I knew you could do it, man, you know, from the start. But the initial stages, when you are building out, you have to bet on yourself, you know. Because if you won't believe in yourself, who else will, you know? And until you have complete conviction in your own self, you know, your output would never come about. You would not put in 100% efforts because you'd be like, you know, like, who cares, you know, like, I'm getting 7 views on my podcast, you know, why am I even trying to accomplish anything at all? And if you fight this belief system within yourself, there are a lot of good things waiting for you, because the reality is that you have a lot of wisdom and great stuff to share. The only person who's losing out is the other person who could receive it, because you don't think you're capable enough of giving it. So once you think like that, you know, you'll realize that this is not about you. This is much bigger than you, you know. This is about people who are waiting to read your writing. Like, I mean, I'm just telling you, I really love reading, and I only read like philosophy most of the time, and I don't read fiction at all. But reading that, no jokes, not because you're a guest on my podcast, I did have tears in my eyes, because I was just like, bro, like, I mean, I could feel the pain, and I was just so amazed by how vividly you would express some of the moments. And I was just taken aback. So I know that there's so many people who are just waiting and listening to that, and reading that story made me so grateful about my own life. You know, that we could have been in a war. Pandemic has just asked us to stay at home, watch Netflix. And back in the day, you know, people were enlisted and you had to go to war, and people were dying, and, you know, you could not help it. And the government was just, you know, like, disgusting. So, you know, like, that simple writing brought out so much emotions in me. And it was only because of your talent and your ability to articulate those feelings. So this is all not just to hype you up, but I mean it. Like, I mean it. I hope it made sense.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. That was very kind to say. And it means a lot to hear it too.
Of course.
Because you want someone's going to have that visceral emotional response to something you write. So it's really nice to hear that you actually did.
Of course, I'm sure, like, there's so many people who are waiting to read that, and you must remember that, promise you. And you're in GMG, you know, like, just trying to find some kid and be like, hey, bro, do you know, like, any of your friends who are authors, not authors, but, you know, who are into writing or writing majors and stuff like that. You know, you could just go on LinkedIn and go to a school, you know, like a writing school, and see all the students and try DMing people and stuff like that, you know. Like, I have to DM 50 to 100 people for 2 people to say yes. So, you know, like, it's a numbers game, and you'll be surprised at the results you can find. So, otherwise, I had to ask you, would you have any advice for young people like ourselves who are just trying to navigate our way into the world?
Yes, actually. I mean, it's kind of cliche, and you don't fully appreciate how true it is until you're older and looking back. But if there's a thing you want to do, a risky thing, a tricky thing, a thing that everybody's telling you will never work, now is the time to do it. In your 20s, especially like early 20s, like that's the time to get out there and take risks and do something crazy that you hope might pay off, because the older you get, and it starts to happen much faster than you would think, but the older you get, the less likely it is, and the harder it is, like just logistically and in terms of time, like so faster than you could possibly imagine, you're going to start to acquire responsibilities and obligations that will prevent you from taking those big, crazy risks. So if there's a big, crazy thing you want to do, now is the time to do it. Don't wait.
Thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to ask you, is there anything that you would like to ask me?
So what inspired this? Like I love the tone of the podcast and the topic of it, that it's not like laser focused on any one topic, and it seems to be really like based around promoting positivity and just sort of gathering wisdom and stories. So like what prompted that approach?
So I think the start of the podcast was, I'm based in India, and I actually had a really bad experience at school. I was bullied by my teachers, and being in India and Asia in general, like school is everything, it is your life. And when I had that kind of a negative experience, I had decided that time that I'm going to build my wealth and I'm going to build my path without formal education. And that is when I started really educating myself from real business people, like Gary, or real writers that I really respect, Daisaku Ikeda, I don't know if you know about him, and real people, and just crafting my own like beliefs and my, identity through them. I remember that I was really fascinated by business and I wanted to learn how to make money quickly and things like that. And instead of reading business books that were written in 2008, I, reached out to people like Gary and started consuming his videos almost like with notes and pencils and making notes and really studying. And one of the biggest things he said people are the biggest ROI, and the reason you go to college is because of the network you'll meet. So I decided to start building up my network through the podcast. And I practice Buddhism, and that talks a lot about, the importance of people and the dignity of human life. And I really started honing my emotional intelligence through reading those books. And I understood how to build a powerful connection was not based on common interest, but connecting as like a life to life. And when I was speaking with people, I didn't know people, on a podcast, the guest could be someone super famous, super well known, so you do a lot of research and you can understand questions. But when I was interviewing people, I didn't know who they were, but I was like, what, we have a lot of common. I want to know if they're happy, I want to know about their story, and I want to know about their professional trajectory, because I was trying to build mine. And like, it was so fascinating to hear from you how you got your first gig, as an engineer, and that is something that sets you on, because what I'm struggling with right now is even getting my foot in the door. I know I can work hard, I know I'm super capable, but it's just that, getting that first in. And that's why I was learning from people, like teaches you a lot, like these are real experiences I'm learning from, it's not something I'm reading in a book. So the podcast was inspired by this, I wanted to learn, and I started documenting my entire journey to show the youth, actually leaving a blueprint on how it's done. If like a great connection of mine leads to a job or leads to something else, it's all documented. You can see how I start out super awkwardly, we don't know each other, but as the conversation grows, we're able to do like a lot of value exchange, and that's how it leads to something much bigger than that. So I'm sorry that was a long answer, but like that's how kind of the podcast was crafted and inspired.
I really admire that. I admire the fact that you took that sort of moment of struggle and opposition and turned it into motivation to just go your own way. Like so many people would have just let that beat them down, and maybe even would have stayed in school, but resentfully in that way where it's like, oh yeah, well, I'm being bullied by teachers, then I'll show them I won't learn anything. And like to go the opposite way of like, well, no, I'm still going to learn a bunch of stuff. I'm just going to teach it to myself because I can't trust you people. That's really fantastic. I really admire that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I actually wanted to ask you your advice on like a little bit about JMG, as to would you have any advice for me as to how I could go about it and how I could, just kind of get my way in. So.
I mean, it's definitely finding, the departments that are actually hiring and looking for people. It's a little difficult now with us being remote and not having an office location, because we used to do a lot of interning, but we don't really do too much of that now because it's very difficult to have intern. But to just find out what departments that interest you are hiring and then just apply. That to me is the best way. I mean, it's, a kind of standard boring way to go about it, but
Right.
It's to just apply and be persistent, and your name will be remembered. Like, even if you don't get chosen for something, you come in for something else, they're going to remember you.
Yeah.
And so, and you're actually very much a GMG person. Like, you very much embody
Thank you.
what he looks for. So I definitely think there would be a place for you, depending on what you're going for and what's available. But yeah, just apply, and just be persistent.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Awesome. And if I make it there, I'll get to say like, hey, I know Chris, and we can say hi to each other.
Yeah, exactly. And, ideally that they won't count that against you.
On the last note, I wanted to ask you, would you have any feedback for the podcast, any way that we could have done better or improved?
No, this was a fantastic experience, beginning to end. And you're really good at asking a question and then kind of getting out of the way of the answer, but also maintaining control over where the podcast goes and keeping things on track while also allowing those spaces for spontaneous conversation. So you're very good at this.
Thank you. Thank you. That detailed comment meant a lot to me. I mean, I never looked at it like from a third person. That's really interesting. So thank you so much for that kind feedback, and thank you so much for saying yes. This was one of the coolest podcasts I've had, and thanks for sharing such interesting stories with me. I was actually just going to interview you as a director of engineering at GMG, but reading your writings, I became a little bit of a fan, and I was like, I can't wait to ask all these questions about plot twists and stuff. So I really look forward to maybe see more stories from you, maybe see an Instagram page somewhere in the future. Yes.
Definitely. Well, I can't promise anything on the social media front, but definitely more stories.
All right, fantastic. I'm going to let you know as soon as the podcast goes up, and usually we upload all the clips on Instagram, but since you're not there, I also upload clips on LinkedIn, and the podcast goes up on YouTube as a visual podcast. So I'm going to update you with where everything's at.
Great. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day, and let's please keep in touch. Let me know if I can ever do anything.
Likewise.
Perfect. See you. Thank you so much. Bye. Have a nice day.
You too.